Hello and welcome to Running Your Stories. Today we're going to be talking with Anna Troup, who is a fantastic British female ultra runner, having taken first place at 200-mile races already this year and a second place at another 100-mile race. We'll hear more about that during the podcast, but today we're also joined by Anna's two daughters, Millie and Bella, and together the three of them are known as Troup Girls Run on Instagram, and Millie and Bella are preparing to run their first 100-mile race. And so we talk about what it's like for teenagers to prepare to run 100 miles or to complete 100 miles on foot within a 30-hour cut-off at the Javelina Jundred. It's really a very fascinating interview with two wonderful young ladies, and Anna, who's a fantastic ultra runner. So this is a very interesting interview, and it's something that isn't happening everywhere. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you. So Anna, Millie and Bella, welcome to Running Your Stories. I believe you go by the handle Troup Girls Run. Is that right?
We do? Yes.
So yeah, I'm very interested to talk with you all today. Anna and I met recently on the Lakeland 100. I think we spent a few hours running together during that race.
I think more than a few hours, Kevin. I think it was probably about 20 hours.
Yeah, a very pleasant experience from my side. You were dragging me up the hills, and I seem to remember keeping you awake a little bit. So I think it ended up as good teamwork.
It certainly was.
Yeah. Excellent. So we said we'd start off with a little of your background, Anna, because I have to admit I had no idea who you were or any of your history before we started running together. And the more I dragged out of you, because I have to say you weren't very forthcoming with with showing off about your fantastic achievements. The more I dragged out of you, the more impressed I was, and I think you have a very impressive history over the last few years. So I don't know if I'm going to have to drag it all out of you again, or whether you can give us a summary of what you've been up to.
Well, I suppose we started doing ultra running in about 2012, 2013. I'd broken my foot. I've got a coalition, and I broke my foot, and I was in a boot for 6 months, and it stopped me wanting to do as much road running anymore. And so Richard, my partner, and I decided that we'd investigate trail running. It looked like a way we could have adventures together. And so we decided we'd aim for UTMB. Richard's climbed Everest, he's good at mountains, and so I felt quite comfortable that doing some mountainous stuff would work quite well. And so we aimed for UTMB, which meant going off and collecting points. Neither of us at this point had run anything more than a marathon. We'd come from a running background, we'd come from an Ironman background, and the whole idea of going long was totally new. And so we sort of embarked on acquiring UTMB points, which in those days I think you needed 8 as opposed to the current 15. It was a whole different game. And we were lucky enough to get a place in 2014. And we went off and did that and absolutely loved it. We followed that up with the TDS in 2015, where I was lucky enough to get on the V40 podium for the women. And I suppose that was when we started to realise that I could actually move relatively quickly in these longer races. And so that was where I suppose we started thinking about me doing some actual racing as opposed to just finishing, which is a very different ball game. It was a different amount of training, and it was a different sort of approach to the actual event. No sitting in aid stations anymore, taking our time. It was much more about how do we keep moving and how do we make sure that we do well. And I suppose this year has been the culmination of a few years now of decent and relatively consistent training. And I suppose we had a second in the Arc of Attrition, and then moved on and won the Wendover Woods 100, and then 2 weeks later won the Lakeland 100. So I think that was a good sort of set of consistent training coming through over the last few years, culminating in those 2 races. Equally, doing 200s back to back was a bit of a dangerous game. It wasn't sort of set out and planned at the beginning of the year. We rarely plan anything, Kevin. And it was, so I think ultimately, if Sabrina Verjee hadn't been injured and hadn't had to pull out of 50 miles, I'm sure that I'd have been looking at a second or third place. But as it worked out, Sabrina was injured and did have to pull out, and so I was able to go on and win the event, which was absolutely thrilling. And you were such a part of that, as you know. So. So that's a little bit of the background and the history. I think it's slowly been coming over the last 5-6 years, and sadly I just came to it late. At 49, I think my days of winning outright are probably very, very numbered. So it's quite fun to be doing it now.
Yeah, I mean, as I keep saying, it's very impressive. When we were running together on the Lakeland 100, and you were talking about the fact that you'd completed, let alone won, another 100 just 2 weeks before. I was really quite blown away. That kind of recovery and going at it again is very impressive. And I think that comes from the consistent levels of training and consistent levels of running over a number of years. And I think you'll surprise yourself with how long you keep that up for. I would expect that you've got a number of years to stay at that level.
I hope you're right, Kevin. We've got the TDS in 10 days' time.
Yes.
You're right.
Yeah, and again, I've been watching on Strava what you've been up to since the Lakeland 100, and of course you've been out to France and covered. Is it all of the route for the TDS you've already covered?
We've covered all of the route we don't know and some of the bits that we do know, and then other favourite trails out there. So we've definitely done the miles and meters, just not the whole thing. We know bits of it really well. I think that the issue has been getting the girls out as well and fitting in their training around our training.
Try and juggle both, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm very much looking forward to following your career, and I'll be dot watching when you're doing TDS. And I believe you're officially an elite athlete in the TDS. Is that right?
Yes, officially according to the ITRA. I'm not sure how official that makes it, but officially, yes.
Well, I think it's well deserved.
Yeah, I get to start at the front. I think that's quite exciting.
Yes.
Yeah. That probably means I'll go off far too fast and I'll be caught up, and then I'll be sort of herded down by the very fast men just behind.
Yeah. Well, I guess from our experience in the Lakeland 100, remember those early aid stations? Don't faff.
That's right, don't faff, just get straight on.
Yeah, that's how I caught you up at the start.
Well, I was faffing in an aid station.
Well, that's what you told me, because I went straight through the first 2 aid stations without stopping at all. I just dibbed and out. And then it was after the second aid station that I caught you up and we started running together.
That's right. I'd faffed about, filled water bottles. Yeah, got a bit lost. You're right, Kevin. That's exactly what happened.
But after that, I thought we kept each other very disciplined. Every aid station we went through together, we had a plan before we went in, stuck to it very well, and out again quickly. So.
I think that's because by then I couldn't eat anything again, so by then I was very quick through the aid stations.
Yeah, but you were still taking care of yourself, and you were trying different things and had different ideas going on, and you managed to do all of that without spending a lot of time at it, because quite rightly you're spending the time before the aid station thinking about what might be there, what might be an option, and get in, sort it out, and get out again. That's good. So let's start to move on to the Troup Girls Run project, because it's a very impressive project from what I've heard. So would you like to introduce it? And
yes. So it was last October, and Bella, my youngest, had just turned 14, and we read about a 15-year-old boy who had raced the Javelina Jundred and finished. And I think Ian Corliss, or one of the ultra writers, had done a write-up. And I forwarded this to Bella and Millie, and I said, look at this, you could yet be the youngest. And I was joking. And Bella came back and said, do you really think we could do this, Mummy? And I said, no. He's clearly the son of an organiser. There's no way you'd be allowed to do this at your age. It's absolutely a no, because I knew that the UK races were 18 or 21, and there was absolutely no way that the girls would be allowed to race 100 miles. So Bella then, meanwhile, went off under her own steam and did lots of research and came back and said, actually, there's no minimum age limit at Javelina. So I'm going to ask the question again. Can we do this? And I said, absolutely not. Let's really think through what this would mean. This is the training. And I have to sort of, say at this point, neither of the girls have ever shown any interest in running whatsoever.
Well, I tried, but I got mine was just 20 minutes. It was really not.
So we're starting from absolutely nothing, Kevin. And on top of this, we knew that Millie had to have a planned ankle operation because she'd hurt her ankle playing netball so badly that there was no option but an operation. We'd been putting it off over the summer, so it was planned for the October half term. And we also knew that Bella had just come out of her scoliosis brace, and so she needed time there. So both of them were starting from a point of pretty much zero. But Richard and I sat them down and said, if you really, really want to do this, this is how it could look, and this is what we'll have to plan out. And then come January, when the entries open, we can review it before we put our entries in and spend any money. And then we can review it again before we book any flights, etc. And so that's what we did. And so we started from very little. And I would say, and I don't know the girls can add to this, but I would say the main training has been back-to-back weekends of building up long days on their feet hiking as opposed to running, and then on their own and with us they've built up the running. And I think they've both individually done with me 1 half marathon on the trails, but that has been the longest consistent run. Everything else has been around run walk or back-to-back run walks or back-to-back long hikes. And as you saw from our Strava yesterday, it's been much more about let's build miles and meters and leg strength through lower impact hiking in big hills. And that's the aim of the UTMB block that we're going to do next week. So I don't know, girls, if there's anything you want to add, Millie?
I think both of us, we did build the running up. So we try and run now 6 days a week, I think, when we're not doing big hikes on one of the days. And I think, so our run is now, 6 or 7 miles? I think sort of 5 to 7 is what we try and aim for now. But it was both of us. I mean, I had my ankle rehab operation, it was phasing in the running, so 30 minutes, or 2-minute run, 2-minute walk, and up to half an hour and then longer. And Bella had shin splints at one point, so had to bring the running down again. So that's been a different component. But it's interesting for me how it's not just, I thought initially it's just the running and that was all you had to do, but actually it's mainly been the hiking's almost the biggest part of it for quite a lot of us now, I think.
I'm not really sure what happened. I used to absolutely hate running. When we were forced to do cross country at school, it was like my least favourite day of the year. And that was, you'd only be running for about 10 or 15 minutes then. So this has kind of completely changed our world. I think it's helpful for us because even after this, if we don't go on to be incredible ultra runners like our mother, it'll still have given us the endurance-based fitness and also the ability to be able to build up that fitness again. So that's a useful skill for later life, I think. Yeah, because building it is the hardest part.
Yeah. At first, it was really tricky just actually getting running in the first place. That's probably the hardest bit. So I'm trying to at least maintain a base fitness afterwards. So I think the biggest thing for me is that I can now run and it's enjoyable and it's something I can do outside and it's just nice because before I could never get a dreamed of going out for an hour and enjoying it. So that's been nice actually.
So we are all set for October, Kevin. The entries are in, the flights are booked.
It sounds like a very good approach. I'm comparing it to my approach for my first 100, which is about 18 months ago. I went from running less than 12 miles to running the 100 in a year, in 12 months. And I didn't do anywhere near as much focus as you've talked about on the hiking. That was only in the last probably 2 or 3 months before the race I started putting the hours in hiking. The biggest issue I found with that was that my ankles didn't have the strength that I needed for the time on the feet, because that ended up taking me close to 46 hours, which was a lot of time on the feet.
Really, that's a lot.
And it was the Spine Challenger, so you have a heavy pack with that as well. For running wise, it's a heavy pack. And so yeah, I was really, both ankles reacted badly to it, swelled up really badly. But I think in some ways this is where your ankle operation and the rehab from that is probably going to help you a lot, because I'm guessing that you've had some very good physio with that, and strengthening exercises and a lot of very good stretching on the ankles.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's definitely rehab. I think I might have let it lapse slightly too early, so I've recently had a couple of issues with my ankles rolling. But I've got a kind of backbone of exercises that I now go back to and keep doing, because my ankles have still been an issue. But yeah, I think that's still probably the weakest bit of me, if that makes sense. They're the bit that aches most in training and everything. But I think, yeah, it's been quite important doing that stability stuff and also just the strengthening. And
And I think, as you know, if you've had an injury, the psychosomatic element of, is it getting injured again, or is it just a small ache? And I think so Millie's had to work through the mental side of, my ankles now have a big strip of mesh down the side. They're not going to break,
Exactly, yeah.
but they ache, and that's okay. And it's just about working through that with Millie sometimes, and particularly on sort of unstable traverses as opposed to the ups or the downs, Kevin.
Yes.
Yeah. And to be honest, with ultras, there's a point where everything's going to hurt at some point because you're on your feet for so long. And that's what I've kind of found. Everything kind of hurts, an hour later it's fine again. So for me, it's just working out, okay, is it actually bad or is it just an ache that everything else is going to ache the same at some point? I think actually foam rollering's been one of the biggest breakthroughs from this thing. It's horrible, but yeah, it's sort of a daily occurrence in our household now, I think.
We have family foam roller sessions in front of the TV, Kevin.
We literally do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you say, foam rollering is really good, and it really helps. Because again, I find that often the area where the pain isn't necessarily where the problem is. It could well be one of the larger muscles elsewhere in the leg that's pulling on that.
Exactly.
And the foam rollering really helps. So yeah, again, it's a very kind of well thought out positive strategy. As you say, one of the toughest things in ultras is that at some point everything is going to hurt. And you slowly get used to the idea that, yeah, things are going to hurt, but they're actually going to stop hurting. I mean, the best example I've read of that is Scott Jurek's book about, I think it's North, it's called, about the Appalachian Trail, where that's 2,500 miles he ran. But that's an interesting read, because he talks about, after it was less than a week, he felt like his whole body was falling apart and couldn't take it. But he completed the whole thing, and just the mental process that you go through of realizing that actually you can keep moving, your body starts to sort itself out, is really interesting. So one of the questions that I've been asking a few people what they might like to ask you, and the number one question is, or was, I'd say, because you've answered it to a large extent, was about how Anna's managed to motivate a pair of teenagers to want to do something like that.
Well, I mean, I'll let the girls answer for themselves in a minute, but all I would say is, any parent of a teenager will know it's virtually impossible to motivate a teenager to do anything unless they want to do it. So, but now I'll let the girls answer that.
I think I felt like it was kind of inevitable, because we've seen Moira doing it for so long. It's like, okay, right, it's quite a cool thing to do. And actually recently we've done some volunteering for Centurion races, which we've really enjoyed. And actually that sort of brought us, we've been kind of slowly getting more and more into the ultra world, I think. So it was kind of, we wanted to try and do it ourselves for once, actually. And I think, like I said, the fact that I can now run for fun is really big for me. And I think I've actually kind of come to appreciate the time outdoors, the hours. I mean, a lot of it's hard, but I think also something I thought I could never ever do. I never thought I could, so I'm kind of proving myself wrong every time we do a big session or we do a race like our 50 miles. Like that, again, that's such a big thing. So I think it's just proving myself that you can do things you can't really do. That's kind of, if that makes sense, that's quite a big motivator.
Yeah, I agree. I think also until, well, as Mai mentioned earlier, until last summer, I was in a scoliosis brace for 18 months, which is effectively a thick plastic corset that I had to wear for 23 hours a day, which made it pretty much impossible to do any kind of meaningful exercise, apart from the occasional tennis session at school. And at the same time, I was diagnosed with asthma as well. It was actually how they found I had scoliosis, because the doctor was listening to my chest and she said, "Oh, I think you might have a slight curve in your spine. I'm going to refer you." And I don't know, the rest is history. But I think I wanted to do something just to prove that I could. Yeah, because it's just an amazing thing to do, especially as, well, all of us have things medically wrong with us. Knees, ankles, spines. And yeah, I think if we can do it, anyone can do it, really. It's just a really great thing to do. And also, in terms of getting fit again, well, not again, getting fit and
For the first time.
yeah, doing something really meaningful and worthwhile, I think, yeah.
And I suppose in terms of straight motivation, Kevin, one of the things Richard and I were clear about is we needed to have targets in the calendar that they could work towards. So we did a 32-mile run walk back in, I want to say January, February. Prior to that, we'd chosen the solstice in December and said, right, we're going to walk for the hours of daylight. So we're going to start at sunrise and we'll finish at sunset. And that was quite a fun challenge. And then we booked a Long Distance Walking Association 50-miler in Shropshire, which had the same meters but was half the distance of Javelina. So the girls in April did 50 miles, which we were planning on run walking, but because Bella had got injured playing tennis with shin splints, that meant it became a hike. So they'd spent 17 and a half hours on their feet in April. This big block in the UTMB and doing that walk for the UTMB is their next big block. It's the 100 miles over the 4 days. And so I think maybe that's been a motivator. I don't know, girls having specific...
Yeah, definitely. Well, at least it makes sort of day-to-day motivation much easier because you know you've got something quite soon to train for. So it's a bit like exams. I mean, Javelina, until quite recently, it still felt really far away. It's like, oh, I've got loads of time, it's fine. So it could be quite easy to let training take a back seat. Oh, I'll just do a couple of small runs, I've got loads of time. But actually, because we had these interim goals, there was always something quite immediate that we had to train for because we knew it was still quite a big ask. I mean, next week, we know it's going to be big. The biggest day is 30 miles and 3,000 metres. That's the biggest out of the four, but it's still pretty huge, so it's kind of a bit scary. Like this week we're doing some big days because we know it's going to hurt our legs, it's going to be big, so we need to try and train for that. So yeah, I think that's useful.
With less than 3 months to go, it's pretty terrifying.
It's quite scary.
Yeah, I think everyone's pretty terrified when they come into their first really big event, whatever that is, whether it's a shorter, much faster race or a very long one. And what I would say about that, something I've kind of taught myself, is just remember that the event is just exactly the same as what you've been doing in your training, and don't try and think about the whole 100 miles. I remember the first time I tried to think through the entire route of the Spine Challenger, sort of all the way through all the pieces together. I was overwhelmed. I was almost sat crying at my desk to try and think about the fact that that's what I had to do, and so I just never did again. I didn't bother ever trying to think about the whole thing in one go, and when I go into the big races now, I always just think, okay, from here to the next aid station, it's this and this and this, and then I'll think about the next part, and know that I've got the preparation there, so that you know all the maps are there, the GPS is there, and everything else, but you don't have to think about it and get yourself overwhelmed with it, because I think for the vast majority of people, thinking about something as big as covering 100 miles on foot is overwhelming, and it's fairly terrifying. So yeah, you're definitely not unusual to feel worried by that.
I think that's really good advice, Kevin. I mean, certainly one of the things I've learned running ultras is never at any point think about what you've done, and never at any point think about what you've got to do.
Yeah,
just literally be in the moment and doing one step in front of the other, and you'll get to the end. So I think that's really great advice.
Yeah, and I think actually from training, the biggest thing is that you just have to kind of carry on and just keep going. Like, you just don't even think about it. Stuff hurts, you're tired, you just kind of keep moving. That seems to be the main thing.
Yeah, because if you think about how far you've got to go, you're just
depressing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, you kind of have to not think about it too much.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And again, it takes time and practice to get into that mindset of just being in the moment. But exactly as you have described about getting your health and fitness to a level where you're confident that you can go out and you can just be in the outdoors and you can be in the moment, and you don't have to think too far ahead or too far behind, because you know what you're capable of, and that's when you really start to enjoy it. Which it takes time to get there.
And I think one of the really interesting pieces for me and Richard about this process has been watching the girls learn to manage themselves outside over long periods of time. So both of them have different ways of managing their own down periods. We all know in ultras you get that cycle of up and then that cycle of down, and you've got to work out how to work your way through those and manage them. Both of them have got very good at doing that. They've got good at knowing when they need new nutrition and when it's energy, or actually when it's just maybe to put their headphones in. Bella, particularly at the bottom of a climb, needs her headphones on. Billy, as she's going down a climb, needs her headphones on. So it's been a fascinating process, and I think that time outside on their feet, those longer days, has been part of the sort of mental and emotional management, as opposed to just learning how to be physically fit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you still get the odd grumpiness to deal with, I think. But yeah, I mean, we've got music really helps. That's a big thing for both of us.
Yeah, definitely.
Even, I mean, I train probably outside about half the time with music, half the time without. But on treadmill, always music, because it distracts you. But even outdoors, yeah. I think it's sort of knowing when you need to eat or need to drink. I mean, it's definitely been a learning curve for that. And just, managing yourself and your mood is quite difficult. But I think with the four of us, it's always been quite, you and Richard are normally fine because it's less tricky for you. But me and Bella definitely have ups and downs at different points, which is good and bad, I guess, because one of us is probably always grumpy at one point. But
as we know from the Lakeland 100, Kevin, if everyone has their ups and downs at different points, it can work quite well.
Yes, and it did. Yeah, we were certainly having ups and downs at different times, and really helping each other through it, which was great. Yeah. So you've mentioned a little bit about eating and drinking. Do you have a clear plan on nutrition? Is that something that's still developing? What do you like to eat and drink when you're out on the trail?
Bella, you love cream eggs, I think.
I love cream eggs. The problem with them is that you can only buy them around Easter, so we kind of try and stock up, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
I also love Mr. Kipling angel cake slices.
They're good, actually.
They are so
really good.
And also they come individually packaged in small slices, so they're actually really great for taking out. Millie likes Coke.
Yeah, I found Coke's really helps. I don't know if it's the caffeine or the sugar or both, but yeah, I really like Coke. I think a couple of times we had a really bad mood, a couple of training sessions, and we realised I hadn't had Coke, and it might have been the reason. So I tend to try and bring it now if I can, and it just helps. Especially overnight in Shropshire, the Coke was really useful to keep me awake. I think it just gives me a little boost. I love actually flapjacks. It's been really good for me. It's just more because chocolate kind of moves through quite fast. If you need a quick boost, chocolate's great. Or we like the Cadbury's buttons, your favourite.
The big buttons.
Yeah, the giant ones. But I think flapjacks slow release kind of lasts for a bit longer.
And I think what you're hearing there, Kevin, is two teen girls who have got to the point where they can't eat chocolate all the time like they used to when they were small. And so being out on the trails is an excuse to bring back their favourite chocolate treats.
Yes.
And so aside from that, in terms of their nutrition, what we try and do is make sure that every hour to 2 hours they've both had something. What we found is if they go beyond, for Richard and I, we can do very long days on virtually nothing now because we've just done it for so long. But for the girls, again, given where they are in their ultra journey, they do need something every hour to 2 hours just to keep them going, and we will keep an eye on that. What we try and do is bring in real food as well.
Yeah, we're quite big on that.
We're quite
Sandwiches big. Or whatever, just something that's proper, not just crap, basically.
Yeah, so they, so yesterday, for example, in Wales, they each had sort of 4 quite big chunky quarters of sandwiches, which we made sure were eaten at decent points through the journey.
They remind us, have you eaten a sandwich? Should you have another quarter now? It's quite helpful because we probably forget half the time. So it's a bit of both of us, but you're better at remembering. Okay, we're going to be climbing in about half an hour's time. You need to do something now, so you've got energy going through.
What we haven't got into with the girls at all, and probably because Richard and I are not great users, is energy gels, energy powders, energy drink. None of the sort of classic products we haven't really experimented with, and I guess that's deliberate. We know that there's regular aid stations on Javelina. We know there'll be real food, and we would rather, and I think, given the speed we'll be moving, real food is probably a better option for the girls with their odd bits of chocolate or their odd bits of sugar than a lot of energy products.
Yeah, I tried lemon flavoured Tailwind yesterday and I really couldn't get further than a couple of sips because it tastes exactly like lemon Nurofen.
Yeah, you weren't super happy, were you?
No, I'm not keen on anything that resembles medicine.
I mean, you used to love Tailwind because you can barely do any energy drinks.
No, I mean, I've tried all of these things and I move through them over time and then they start to make me sick and then I can't touch them again. So so we haven't gone there with the girls at this point.
But also, I think because we're not running that much, actually, you can stomach the real food and it's got time to digest. I think if we're running lots more and doing a fast, or a flat 100, for example, like the Thames Path, when you can just run, then it'd be a bit of a different story because you can't walk as much, so the real food wouldn't work so well. But I think because of our actually run-walking strategy, real food does work for us.
Yeah, all sounds very sensible, and as you've mentioned, Anna, these things kind of change over time as well. What works now probably works really well in another year's time. If you continue to do these kinds of events, you'll probably change your strategy, and it'll develop over time. But yeah, definitely interesting. So one of the other questions that I've had from I thought quite an insightful question. I was in one of my favourite running shops in Sheffield yesterday, Accelerate. They've got a young guy works in there who's 20 years old, so he thinks about some younger people things than I do. And his question was, what do your school friends think of you doing this?
I think we're absolutely mad, I think, is the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends that run cross country and they all say, okay, well, why don't you just do something short, like start with 5 or 10k? I was like, yeah, but where's the fun in that? You know, too many people do that. It's gotta be something really big.
I think until you started doing it, it's almost kind of incomprehensible, I think. Because when we did the 50, that felt massive. And I was like, okay, 100, we're doubling that. It's so huge. I think it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around if you haven't done any of the long training or anything. But even for me, initially, Javelina was such like a woolly concept. 100 miles is big. And that's what all my friends think, it's just this huge thing. But it's kind of like quite vague and not really
It's a pretty
definite.
abstract concept.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think this is kind of crazy. I think, the fact that our parents do it kind of explains a bit of it. So it's not just us being mad, it's them being mad as well. But
also, I think ultra running is a pretty niche sport, to be honest. It's not very big, not that many people know about it or follow it. So kind of bringing their attention to it, they can't really grasp like what we're actually doing. Like they say, oh, it sounds so big, but they can't really comprehend how big it actually is. I think we couldn't either until pretty recently. Would you agree?
I think that's fair enough. Yeah.
And I think it's quite interesting, Kevin, because for this peer group, probably the closest they would ever see is a Duke of Edinburgh type big hike. That's really the closest.
Yes.
And
And actually, at the beginning, I did with mine and DV quite a lot. That was the only thing I had to link back to that was anything similar to our training. So yeah, I think.
But it's still super different. Like, I'm doing my DV bronze in September, and we only have to camp for one night. We have 2 days of hiking. We only have to be out hiking for 6 hours each day, which is absolutely nothing when compared to thinking how long we're going to be out on the trails doing our ultra. That's going to be upwards of 24 hours, so it's a pretty big leap.
and I suppose for me that's quite interesting, Kevin, because that shows how far the girls have come in the last 8-10 months. Because for most of that peer group, the idea of being on their feet for 6 hours on DV is massive.
Yeah.
And these guys now think of, you know, a 7-hour day as quite small compared to some of the days they've done. So I think it's just about moving that mental mindset on in a sort of sensible way. And so I think for their peer groups, it's just until, I think when the girls complete it, she says sounding positive, I think when the girls complete it, then it will become something that's more comprehensible to the peer groups. I think until then, it's just this big out there idea that they haven't really understood. And the idea that Bella would spend her afternoons at school running round and round lacrosse pitches because that's the only place she's allowed to run is just something they think is slightly bonkers, as opposed to a sensible way of attaining their ultimate goal.
Yeah. Well, that was bonkers. I mean, 400 metres for 6, you made 6 miles is quite soul destroying, I think.
Yeah, especially in the dark. And my favourite one was in February when I was running in the snow around the 400 metre track. That was pretty interesting.
We love training.
Yeah. Again, if I hadn't had music, then I would not have been able to do it. Like, some people don't like it because it's a psychological crutch, but that's the appeal of it, to be honest. It's a distraction, and it's a much needed one when you're running laps of a 400 track for an hour.
Yeah. I think the peer group was interesting because when you started your Instagram account, you took Bella's because they had more followers, and then you kind of lost quite a few quite quickly.
I think we lost 200 followers in the space of about 10 days.
Which was Bella's age group. But we started regaining some other ones now. So I think for some it's just like, what are you doing?
I should explain this to you, Kevin. When I was asked to be a brand ambassador for Shock Absorber, they obviously Instagram was part of this, and as the girls would attest, I'm not into anything social media at all.
No.
So Bella said to me, well, look, you should have my account. I've got over 1,000 followers. This all makes great sense. So we turned Bella's Instagram account into Troup Girls Run, and effectively that became our social media, if you like, presence. And then Bella was horrified as very quickly 200 of her followers disappeared. But I mean, I think that probably does tell you there is a peer group or this age group probably doesn't have any concept of what ultra running means. Although I have found it quite interesting that a number of them have stayed and they haven't just disappeared. So there must be some element of interest quietly in what's going on or following what the girls are doing.
Yeah, some of my friends actually said, I love the account, it's really cool what you're doing. And I've got actually texts from people I haven't seen for a year or two saying this is so cool what you're doing, it's really inspiring. So actually from all the sporter people, there's actually a really positive feedback, and like it's a really impressive seeing someone have a goal that's this big, I think.
I think what we haven't done, apart from talking to you today, is documented the journey. And I think probably, one of the things, Richard certainly has a lot of photos as we've gone through. When we get to the end and when we finished, we should probably go back and document the journey, because clearly it's a relatively controversial idea having 2 children of 14 and 16 take on this challenge.
Yeah, that's also a question from adults. Is this safe for you to do it? Should you be doing it? We're both done growing and we know that from back x-rays, etc. So that's not, you knew from a parent perspective that we're fine doing it and it's safe for us to do and everything.
Part of the reason it's not really a thing to have teenagers running ultras is because in the UK, by law, these companies that run the ultras, they're not allowed to permit anyone under the age of 18 or 21, depending on the race, to take part in the event, which is why we had to go
to America.
All the way to America to run 100 miles, because here we just physically wouldn't be allowed to do it.
We discovered it's generally race director insurance, Kevin, that stops it being allowed in the UK, as opposed to sort of any legal reason, but they won't be insured if there's youngsters on the trails.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is obviously one of the key questions about all of this. Um, I'm sure people have been asking, as you've just said, about is this safe? Should you be doing this? And I haven't seen any particular backlash to yourselves at all so far, but there's certainly a chance of that. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of say on this is, in every sport and indeed probably every part of life, when somebody starts doing something which is not the same as the norm, which is not the thing that's normally accepted, there will be many people whose reaction will be to push back against it, whether it's right or wrong or anything else. So I'd say, unfortunately, you shouldn't be surprised if some people's reaction is just to say very bluntly that you shouldn't do it. Unfortunately, I do expect you will get some of that. And that's just completely putting aside anything we've talked about or anything else, and no judgment on this. It is just human nature that when people see things that are not the norm, some people will really push back against that. So I guess that's the next question, really. Have you seen any of that yet? Have you had any negative response?
I mean, definitely, I think as a parent, people say, is it good for them? What about their skeletons and the impact on their physical structures? And as Bella mentioned there, because both of them have had back x-rays, and you can see from those x-rays whether a child is fully grown or not, we are confident, and that's why Bella is no longer in her scoliosis brace, because they know, and she knows, and we know that she is fully grown. So skeletally, there's no issues. I think trail running is arguably an awful lot better for children than road running, because it's softer and it's off-road, and they're using lots and lots of different muscles, and it's not one directional, and so you're constantly developing the different stability, you're developing the core. And so, I mean, from a sort of pure physio perspective, there's been a great amount of encouragement for them to be doing everything off-road. I think we've been challenged, is it right to give them such a big challenge? What happens if they fail? And I think that's somewhere where we are today. Is it okay to set up children to potentially fail? Well, ultimately, you have to take on the big goals, and that gives you an opportunity to succeed. And if you don't make the 100 miles, maybe you make 80. And if you don't make it, and along the way, they could have failed at 50 miles, they could have failed at 32 miles, but instead, it's been about sort of building up to those challenges and giving them the greatest chance of success, rather than considering, will they fail? And if they fail, I think what you've heard today is there's been so many different positives coming out of the whole experience of trying to succeed.
Even if we don't cross the finishing line in October, the whole thing won't have been a waste. I mean, sure, we'll be disappointed, but I don't think we'll regret the whole experience. I really don't.
No, not at all. I think there's so many, self-confidence improving and everything. I think there's a lot of good stuff coming out of it. And I mean, arguably, I know 100 miles is extreme, but I'm fitter than I have been since I was a club swimmer. We run at least five times a week, and probably keep that up even afterwards. I mean, arguably, physically and sort of mentally, you're probably quite much healthier than we were before, to be honest. So it's probably, is it good for us? I'd say it is good for us. And everything talking about getting outside, the mental health side of it is so good. And I mean, everyone's trying to move teens our age back outside and back into fitness and sport and moving. So I think that's good in that sense, definitely.
And as we've moved along this ultra journey, we've kind of discovered that actually it's not all about the running in the actual race. We've done all the calculations, we worked out that actually you can walk a very large portion of it and still finish comfortably within the cut-off time, so long as you are careful with aid stations and how you manage your time. So we will have to run some of it, but the proportion of running to walking is not nearly as large as we once imagined, I think.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that sort of comes back full circle to some of the things we talked about right at the beginning, Kevin. The aim is to finish. The aim is not to race and finish in the top 10.
Yeah. It we're all quite aware of that, yeah.
And I think the wonderful thing about Javelina as a first one is it's 20-mile loops effectively. So as parents, it's one that we can manage very well. We know where the aid stations are. We're not taking them off on a 100-mile big loop where they're 50 miles from anywhere at the furthest point.
That was quite big for you, wasn't it? That you knew if there was a problem, you could get us back safely in a loop quite fast.
And we can do it together, and Richard and I can effectively carry everything, so the girls won't need, because there isn't really any mandatory kit, so there's no big rucksacks. So from a carrying weight perspective, all they've got to do really is carry themselves, and we'll do everything else. So in terms of managing that side of things, it's a good race to do.
Yeah, so it was really thought through from you guys, especially in the safety bit of it, I think.
So there's always going to be pros and cons. I have to say, if they were two teen boys still growing, still, developing, I would be much more reticent to take this on than two teen girls fully grown at a totally different developmental stage. And I suppose we took the view that from a mental resilience perspective, they were ready to take it on. And we tried through the year to build that up in a sensible way.
Actually, I think it's helped that as well. I mean, I'm in a better place mentally, or especially like resilience, determination than I was before. So I think it's a stretch goal, definitely. I think it's good to have those sometimes. So I don't think it's too big.
There we go.
Yeah, no, it's excellent answers, and the fact that all three of you are contributing to the answers is really great for me. I am very impressed with how much I can hear from your answers that you've developed mentally in particular, because I think it's relatively easy to write out a formula for physical development, and I think in general in society we're quite a long way behind on writing out the formula for the development on the mental resilience and that side of things. It sounds like you've been going in a very, very good direction on that, and that's where I completely agree that even if you don't make it to the end of the 100 miles within the cut-off time, it should not in any way be seen as a failure. The whole journey of getting ready to go and stand on the start line is quite spectacular in itself. Certainly, I know a lot of people that set themselves up with these kinds of goals and don't make it to the start line. So getting to the start line is the first big challenge, and then from there you just do exactly what you've done in training.
That's the plan. Getting 4 people to the start line of any 100 well and uninjured, as you know, Kevin, is not the most straightforward.
Yeah,
No,
we're doing our best.
it's very difficult.
I think it's not just us. I think actually having a family of 4 finish 100 miles together. That's pretty rare in itself. Yeah.
Let's see if we're still friends at the end, Kevin, shall we?
It might be interesting. Yeah. It could be interesting though to say that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm also not managing the 4 of us. I mean, I'm quick on the ups, Bella's quick on the downs, so it's sort of the dynamic there is a bit more interesting with 4 of us to manage. But
again, that's part of the reason for doing things like the 4-day UTMB walk. If we can, learn how to coexist as a group of 4 and work together as a team, that's also part of the race. We're going to have to be able to do that on the day. And, at the end of the day, as you know and I know, even as adults who've done 100-mile races, it's still 100 miles. So Richard and I are going to have to manage ourselves, even though we may not be racing at our capacity, we are still going to have to manage ourselves through that process. So it's quite interesting for us too.
Yeah, absolutely, because actually, sorry, I was just going to say, it'll be a lot more time on your feet than you're used to for that distance as well. So.
Yeah, exactly.
it'll be up towards your longer ones, won't it?
It will be up towards that sort of 30-mile mark, which, well, as you and I know from the Lakeland 100, we get close to that, but it will be a very different 30 hours, yeah.
So is that your current target to complete it?
So 30 hours is the cutoff.
Yeah. So
Right.
we should hopefully do it under that.
So I think our current target is somewhere between, I mean, Rich and I have discussed 26 to 28 would be the current target, which I think, given where we are and assuming nothing goes wrong, is achievable. But we'll report back after we've done the UTMB hike and see how that whole process of back-to-back big days goes.
Yeah.
What's the elevation like on the Javelina?
It's we were talking about this yesterday. It's either it's 2,000 to 2,400 meters. It's not, so it's manageable on each loop.
Yeah, and it's sort of gradual up and then gradual down each loop, I think. So it's nothing short, sharp climbs or anything.
It's not technical ascents and descents.
Yeah.
So we should, given what we're trying to do with the leg strength, be able to hike those up quite fast. I think the bigger issue with Javelina is going to be temperature, because it can start off being desert. It can start off relatively chilly, then get very, very hot, and then go back to cooler overnight. So again, the strategy there will be to do the majority of our running at the beginning of the race, and then ideally we will hike the heat of the day, and then come back to more running towards the end, depending on everybody's legs. So again, we're going to have to, and I think this is classic ultra, isn't it? We're going to have to adapt depending on what we find ourselves faced with when we get there in terms of temperature and in terms of how the children are responding to that, because it's impossible for us to train in that kind of heat.
Yeah.
No, it definitely sounds interesting. I guess you'll get some heat next week when you lower down in the valleys. It gets
That would have been the hope. I've looked at the weather and it looks like we're going to get rained on next week.
Yay! Lots of rain.
I know how much you love running in the rain. You'll enjoy it.
I know you love running in the rain, Kevin. I'm not as keen on that cold rain, but there we are. That looks like my week next week. Lots of cold rain. I was rethinking my clothing strategy yesterday in the Brecons when it was sort of 17 and windy and a bit chilly, and I'm not moving as fast as I would usually move. And so I'm thinking, right, I need to rethink what my kit looks like here, because actually it's going to be quite a different experience for me.
Yes, it's a very good point. As you go that bit slower, suddenly the amount of clothing you need to wear increases quite a lot.
Well, it was quite interesting when the girls yesterday were quite warm in just their t-shirts. I had a long sleeve on all day. Even Richard is starting to think about more clothes than he would ever wear, and it's so different when you're not running or moving at your normal pace, what that means in terms of thinking through kit. So there's a good example of how Richard and I are going to have to adapt and change our approach for this particular race.
Yeah, I think because we're working much harder than you guys.
Yeah. Make sure you don't let the girls down.
I know. No pressure then, Kevin. No pressure, thanks.
It's been really interesting. I guess we should also just talk very briefly about your TDS expectations, Anna.
I think so. We've recce'd the new course, Kevin, and I know you look at my Strava, and I have to say they've added in a loop, another sort of 15 miles on 2,000 meters, and whoever has planned that TDS course has either thought, I'm giving up on Alps Pass and I'm going for that Bob Graham straight point-to-point approach, because you're literally now taken up through steep vertical cow fields, basically, with no trods, no paths. We were fighting our way through long grass, almost bracken. It's a really scary extra loop just because of what it's going to do to what was an already very tricky course. I'm terrified about the TDS, actually. I think it's one of those where we cannot think about what that 9,000 meters is going to feel like. We've just got to set off and then do it. So my target, particularly if it's hot, is just to finish in good shape. I think one of the things Richard and I have discussed is points than you need for the UTMB. Actually, you only need, I think, the same points as you need for the CCC, which is only 60 miles and 6,000 meters. So I think there's going to be a lot of people starting that race that are going to find it really at the edge of what they're physically capable of, given what they will have done in training. It's definitely going to be a race of the second half, a bit like we found with the Lakeland 100. It really changes in the second half. people who've been going very, very quickly can suddenly come to a grinding halt, or there will be quite a lot of individuals, I think, dropping out as we get through that halfway point in the TDS, either because it's just bigger than they thought it was going to be, or because that altitude and not the climbs for 2,000 meters, it starts to bite. I'm excited about it in some ways, because I think that plays to my strengths. As you know, I can get better in the second half, and I'm usually quite good on the ascents. I think if it's very hot, it's going to be very, very hard to manage water and nutrition, given it's going to take. So I think the bottom line is my one aim is to finish, and then anything else will be a complete bonus. Last year when I tried to get to the start line at the TDS, I got really, really sick 3 weeks before, and I was out for the best part of a month, not being able to do any training at all. So just to make the start line is going to be really, really exciting. And then we'll take it from there. It's a pretty stacked field. There's lots of really good individuals in there. I'm really hopeful it will play to some of our top UK runners, because I think that much more sort of technical off-roady terrain will play to some of those who are used to running in Scotland and running up in the Lake District. I think the underfoot is going to be quite similar, particularly given this new loop. So we'll see, I think, is the answer. I'm definitely, if I've got one strategy, it's take that first half sensibly and then see where I am with 30 miles to go. But get to that point first before I make any decisions, and not even really think about racing it until there's 30 miles to go.
Yeah, no, it sounds good, and you've certainly got the experience to execute the strategy, which is great. Okay, I think we've covered everything I had in mind. Is there anything else you'd like to say to listeners about this journey that you're on together?
Oh God, I think it's worth trying. It's worth giving it a go always, I think. Even if you think you can't do it, just try and see what happens. I guess it's a bit cheesy, but
anything worth doing is going to be difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what about a slightly different way of phrasing it's almost the same question, but so I have a 14-year-old son who's sitting playing on his Xbox and doesn't want to come out for a run with me. What should I say to him?
You'll feel better afterwards. That's what I tell myself, actually. Yeah. You may not want to go, but it's worth it in the end.
If she can do it, you can do it.
That'll be the peer pressure approach then. If I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah, not 14-year-old happening.
Get that gender competition going.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why I think that you girls are very, very inspirational, and really looking forward to when you do complete this, and the number of people that you're going to inspire, but even just by giving it a go. I think as we've discussed, the mental resilience of setting a huge target and then breaking it down into smaller pieces and moving along that journey and developing yourself is something that, I mean, I didn't run my first 100 until I was 40, and that was partly because I wasn't ready for it until then. So to be doing it in your teens, I think's quite exceptional from the mental resilience point of view, even more than physically. So, I think it's very inspirational.
Thank you.
I think it'll be really rewarding, hopefully. I mean, people always say, why are you doing this? What's the point? I don't know, what is the point of doing an ultra? For the reward you get, really.
I think it's worth it. It's a certain amount of ultra amnesia as well, I think. People don't remember how much it hurts during it. But yeah, I think it's worth doing it in the end.
I think if nothing else, Kevin, they've really embraced the ultra world and the ultra community. And I think being part of the Centurion running aid stations, seeing, adults go through at 50 and then manage to complete when you look at them at 50. Both of the girls have been coming out to UTMB for a couple of years. They've watched the top men placing change. They've seen people look absolutely appalling at 70 miles and then come through and podium. So I think they've learned about that sort of human process, and we've spent time having fun watching quite a few of the documentaries. Some of the hocke documentaries on the hocke women have been really interesting. We call it the crying hocke girls, when because even these top elite runners have these moments where they just sit down and cry, and I think it's been quite useful for the girls to see that actually it's okay, and the really top guys struggle and they come through it, and it's about how you manage that process. So it's been a good journey so far, and there's more to come. There's more to come.
Yes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So let's remind people where they can follow the journey. You mentioned the Instagram earlier.
I'm at TroupGirlsRun. Give us a follow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just repeat that because it just broke up slightly as you were saying it. So it's at TroupGirlsRun.
Yeah. And then you have Twitter, didn't you?
Instagram, is that also?
Is that what? Sorry, Kevin.
Is that also on Twitter?
I haven't put it on Twitter. I've got a Twitter account which is Anna Troups 4.
Yeah.
And I occasionally link through to the Instagram there, but generally, because of the era we're looking at, Instagram is where teen girls go.
Yep.
So I don't have Facebook, and neither of the girls have Facebook, but I think Instagram is the go-to point. And as the journey develops over the next few months, I will start to use my Twitter account to highlight new things going on to Instagram.
Excellent. So as soon as this podcast's edited and ready to go out, I'll message you about it, but then I'll share it onto Instagram as well.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That's marvelous.
Yeah.
And we look forward to seeing you on the start line of something soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned my next big race is the Full Spine in January. So it's 268
God,
miles.
that's huge.
I know, I'm a bit scared. So yeah, I'll be doing another couple of races before then, just kind of part of trying out different ideas and making sure I've got everything as ready as I can be for the next really big one. But yeah,
you'll have to let us know when they are, Kevin. Yeah. I can come and keep you company for some of it.
Sure, yeah. I'll set out my plans and I'll let you know, and see if it's something that works for you to come and
sounds good.
Right. Well, thank you all very much, and very best of luck. I'm sure we'll be speaking again, or at least messaging again before, but very best of luck, and really enjoy it out in the Alps next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
It's one of my favourite parts of the world, so enjoy it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Speak soon.
Thank you for listening to Running Your Stories. That was episode 26. We'll be back soon with more great episodes. Thank you so much to Anna, Millie and Bella. That was a really fantastic conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I hope that you've learned something from it too. We'll be following their progress, and I hope to do a follow-up later in the year to see how they've got on. Please follow us on social media. We're on Instagram. We'll post pictures almost every day of different runs, scenery outside, primarily inspiration as to why we love the trail so much, and also on Facebook and on Twitter, or you can email at runningyourstories@gmail.com. Please get in touch. We're always looking for exciting and interesting guests, and as I've heard on other podcasts, even people who may initially think they haven't got anything exciting or interesting to say, it's always surprising what comes out during our conversations. Don't be shy, get in touch. We'd love to hear your feedback, and thank you for listening. Please subscribe and come back again soon. Thank you.